And from the cradle, Yemen-Saudi truce may be renewed in coming days. Report. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said this week from Moscow that the Yemen truce agreement is Riyadh's priority. Emirati newspaper Al Arab released a report on 9 March stating that an agreement to extend the UN-brokered humanitarian ceasefire agreement between the Ansarullah resistance and the Saudi-led coalition may be announced during the coming days. According to sources cited by Al Arab, the truce extension this time will be according to the specifications of a comprehensive peace agreement, not just a ceasefire agreement. The report states that this may happen during Ramadan, which begins on 22 March. Dialogue will continue despite all the difficulties as a result of the international and regional insistence that the negotiations not fail. The newspaper added about the Omani-mediated talks between Ansarullah and Saudi Arabia. It goes on to say that the truce agreement will be extended for 1 year, focusing on economic and humanitarian aspects. Coinciding with the Emirati report was a press conference held in Moscow between Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan and Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, during which the broad points of the ongoing negotiations with Ansarullah, though Omani mediations were discussed. Farhan stated during the press conference on 9 March that Saudi Arabia's priority is a ceasefire and dialogue among the Yemenis themselves. 2 days earlier, on 7 March, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met with President of the Saudi-backed administration in Yemen, Rashid al-Alimi of the Transitional Presidential Council. During the meeting, MBS reportedly briefed Alimi on the developments in efforts to renew the truce. In recent months, Saudi Arabia and Yemen's Ansarullah-affiliated National Salvation Government, the NSG, have been involved in negotiations mediated by Muscat and aimed at extending the truce agreement, which expired on 2 October 2022. As a result of these negotiations, Saudi Arabia has reportedly agreed to the Sanaa's terms, which include lifting the blockade on the port of Hodeidah and Sana'a International Airport and paying government employees' salaries in NSG territory. Even though no progress has been made in this regard yet, analysts suggest that Saudi Arabia has become more serious regarding reaching a solution, given that the war has become highly costly for it. Just 1 day after the Emirati report was released on 10 March, Saudi Arabia and Iran announced the resumption of diplomatic relations after 7 years of severed ties. The resumption of ties came after a series of secret talks held in Beijing and mediated by China. Political analysts have suggested that a Saudi-Iranian rapprochement will ease the process of renewing the truce agreement in Yemen, given the close relationship between Tehran and the NSG. And Ansarullah on restoration of Iran-KSA relations. Region is in need of regaining security away from U.S. Zionist interventions. This is from almanar.com. The spokesman of Yemen's Ansarullah movement, Mohammed Abdul Salam, commented via Telegram on the announcement of the restoration of the relations between Iran and Saudi, an agreement aimed at resuming relations between the two countries. Saudi Arabia had led a regional coalition to launch a destructive war and impose a starving blockade on Yemen, killing dozens of thousands of innocent civilians and destroying the infrastructure in the impoverished country. Although the UN announced a ceasefire in 2022, the coalition continued besieging the Yemenis suffering from dreadful living conditions. And from almasira.net.ye, Iran, Saudi reconvened spells a catastrophe for U.S. hegemony, analysts say. An American geostrategic analyst and writer has said that the restoration of diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a catastrophe for U.S. hegemony, which is founded on permanent instability between any potential allies and competitors. After several days of intensive negotiations hosted by China, Iran and Saudi Arabia reached an agreement on Friday to restore diplomatic relations and reopen embassies in each other's countries, 7 years after ties were severed over several issues. Daniel Patrick Welch said in an interview with Press TV on Friday, "It's huge. Without the Shia-Sunni split for the U.S. to exploit, where could the world be headed?" he asked poignantly. The U.S. and its imperial watchmen never sleep and are always on the lookout for things like this. Their fake veneer of diplomacy and values are, in fact, the very opposite of what they pretend. China's role is the hallmark of a new era without having to rely on two-faced U.S. diplomats who are usually largely managing their own interests. Nations, societies, and cultures at odds could gasp instead of spending trillions on destroying each other might actually work, dare we say it together, for the advancement of humankind, he stated. By contrast, the U.S., brimming with the hubris of an out-of-touch rich uncle, treats this role with none of this same sincerity, like strolling into Kazakhstan and saying things like, "We are a leader in Asia," the analyst noted. Or another example would be to use brazen acts of terror and violence like blowing up gas pipelines between Russia and Germany to turn potential allies into adversaries at war. Backstabbing acts of evil which turn out to be the distress signal of a dying empire, Welch included. Iran and Saudi Arabia reached an agreement in the Chinese capital of Beijing to restore their diplomatic relations and reopen embassies and missions. The deal was struck on Friday following intensive negotiations between Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani and his Saudi counterpart in Beijing. It was officially announced in a joint statement by Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China. The statement was linked by Shakani Musaid al-Aiban, Saudi Arabia's national security advisor, and Wang Yi, the director of the Office of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission of the Chinese Communist Party. Shamkhani's been involved in exhaustive talks with his Saudi counterpart in Beijing since Monday to find a final solution to the issues between Tehran and Riyadh. The negotiations followed a meeting between Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing last month. And from the public radio, Yemen sides began UN broker talks on prisoner exchange. The UN says Yemen's warring sides have begun talks aimed at implementing a UN broker deal on a prisoner exchange. The discussions between Yemen's internationally recognized government and the Houthi democratically elected government are taking place in Switzerland. They're co-chaired by UN envoy for Yemen Hans Grunberg and the International Committee of the Red Cross. Grunberg urged both parties to engage in serious and forthcoming discussions to agree on releasing as many detainees as possible. According to a UN statement, Yemen's conflict erupted in 2014 when the Iran-backed Houthis seized the capital of Sana'a, prompting a Saudi-led coalition to intervene months later in a bid to restore this internationally recognized government to power. Yemen's warring sides began talks Saturday aimed at implementing a UN-brokered deal on a prisoner exchange, the UN said. The discussions between Yemen's internationally recognized government and the Houthi government are taking place in Switzerland. And UN urges parties in Yemen to fulfill commitment to release prisoners. That is also from Al Arabiya News. We won't go with that one. That one specifically, it's less related to Saudi, although it is having to do with the Yemeni issues. So this is an Al Jazeera take on the Yemen situation.
Doha, thank you. Well, let's get the view on this from Yemen now with Hussein Al-Bukhati. He's in Sana'a. He's a pro-Houthi journalist and joins us. Good to have you with us on the programme. Can I just get your reaction to... news coming out of China about this new deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia and how it might impact and will impact Yemen?
I don't think it will have any impact on Yemen. I mean, we remember that when the war started on Yemen on 26th of March 2015, Saudi still had ties with Iran. They only closed the embassy in January 2016. So the reopening of their embassy or closing it again in the nearby future, it will not actually affect Yemen's. But as Muhammad Abdul Salam, the spokesperson of Ansarullah, he has made a comment about this latest agreement between Saudi Arabia, and he said that the region actually is in need for normal relation to return between all Islamic and Arabic nation, especially in this region, to face together what he called the Zionist and the American intervention in Yemen, which he said that intervention actually invest in dispute between country. That's why here in Sana'a, of course, they will welcome any agreement either between Saudi Arabia, between Iran, or between any other Arabic and Islamic nation. But I think what will affect Yemen is the total lift of Saudi blockade. I just want to remind you that we are coming close to enter the 9th year of the Saudi war and blockade on Yemen, which is on the 26th of March of this month. And I believe, as I hear from here, that the Saudi Arabia have these 2 weeks to show a goodwill and to reopen, total reopening of Sana'a airport, and as well a total reopening of Hodeidah port, and as well to pay the salaries of of all Yemeni civilians from the oil revenue that is Saudi actually is collecting from selling Yemeni oil. And I think that Saudi will not take.
Let me just jump in there. Let me just, Mr. Bukhati, let me just jump in there. Mr. Bukhati, you need to let me, Mr. Bukhati, you need to let me jump in there. You need to let me ask Yemen that are
without any Saudi here in Sana'a, they have, especially Ansar al-Houthi, they have always called for an internal meeting and agreement between Yemenis without any Saudi intervention. But as you mentioned, these all groups, they are actually just tools or toys of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. They are even fighting each other. And what is actually important for Sana'a, as they say, is it will be their main goal is a total liberation from Yemen, and this liberation will be from any foreign troops in Yemen, and it will be from to fight those troops who are actually loyal to this intervention and occupation on Yemen. And that's why they are very critical, but they have always welcomed any talk with any of these groups, either in the south or even though the Muslim Brotherhood, but they should actually cut their ties with Saudi Arabia, or they should not be used for Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates as tools to destroy